This Allis Chalmers threshing machine, my dad purchased in 1937. And my memory is correct, he bought it from a hardware store in LaPorte, Indiana. It was one of the first Allis Chalmers that was made there after the Allis Chalmers Company bought the Rumley Corporation. We were living on a farm south of Knox where Jerry Johnson's lumberyard is at the moment. And a fellow by the name of Cecil Good hauled this home in his straight bed truck. And I can remember the day he pulled in, I ran around back and grabbed on the handbars and rode it to the back of the barn because it was a real big deal for us to be getting something like this. If you notice the front of the threshing machine, there's a carriage sticks out in front. That's what we would call the bundle carrier. Or I guess the correct term would be the sheave carrier, because it's sheaves of wheat and bundles of other things. But that's where the farmers' wagons would pull up on each side of the carrier and throw their sheaves into the carrier, which was then propelled. You can see the chain hanging underneath, was propelled into the threshing machine itself. And the bundles had to be thrown in with the heads first. Now if you threw them in butt first, and the heavier grains like rye would plug up your threshing machine. But as long as you threw them in heads first, went through pretty easily. And then there was metal finger-like affairs that were called concaves that separated the grain from the straw. And in the process, it shook the straw on back, kept back through the threshing machine till it came back to the blower here. And if you notice the pipe on top, that's where the straw came out to, and you've seen straw stacks, I'm sure, in the past, and that's where the straw would come out and was piled in a stack. It also had an automatic feature where you could have the blower stack going back and forth, so you could build kind of like a semicircular straw stack. So then the grains went down through and went through a fan mill. If you notice down at the bottom of the threshing machine, you'll see like a squirrel cage thing. That's what generated the air that removed the chaff from the grain. And then it went across and went up through an elevator, which will go around the other side and show you that. There was also, to propel the straw blower, the outside pulley, there was a belt ran from there to the back of the blower, and that's where the impetus to blow the straw out of the straw stack. And then this elevator here, the grain went up, was elevated up through and back down through the threshing machine as the process of cleaning the grain before it then went to the elevator and then into the wagons. Just a little sidebar I forgot to mention earlier. I have the bill of sale at home, and if memory serves me correctly, I think the price of this threshing machine in 1937 was $1,200. You probably can't buy a tire for a combine today for $1,200, I'm sure. And the tragic part about it is, now I'm making a commercial for farmers, you're getting the same amount for a bushel of wheat today as you did back in 1947, and that's a tragic thing. But that's another story. The inner pulley there was a drive belt roughly 40-50 feet long that went out, of course, in front of the threshing machine, and we used a 1938, was called then Massey Harris. Later on they became Massey Ferguson, and it had a pulley on it that provided the power to drive the threshing machine. Prior to that, of course, in the 20s, and they used steam engines, but this is a little bit later than steam engine. We never did have a steam engine. We did have a Rumley oil pull, but we never used it on this. When we got the rubber-tired Massey Harris, boy, that was a red-letter day, too. That was something great. And it provided enough power to run this. It was very rare you ever choked it up, unless you'd have wagons on both sides, and the farmers like to play tricks then, just like they do now, and they'd pitch bundles in as fast as they could, sometimes at the butt end, to plug up the threshing machine to make my dad mad, which he got mad real easy about that, because you had to stop and flip a cover down in front of it and dig out all the jammed up straw, and he wasn't a very happy camper with that, but that was all part of threshing. Now if you notice on this side of the threshing machine, up by the bundle carrier, you'll see a larger wheel with a belt on it. That propels the knives that were in the front end of the threshing machine that actually they gave you the impression like bear claws or dog claws, like they were digging and eating, and they were razor sharp, and that's what pulled the when the shocks went, or the sheaves went through, it pulled it into the cylinder so that the grain could be separated. And heaven help you if you ever fell in there. There was no, you didn't have any electric brakes or anything. It took about a minute or so to stop the machine. Fortunately, we never had any accidents, but if you ever fell in there, it was sayonara. It would have been a bad deal because those knives were razor sharp. And that's where it was propelled from that big wheel on top. Then as you move on back here, you'll see an elevator type thing that sticks up in the air. Now that's where the grain ended up. After it came through the fan mill, it went down into that lower part and was elevated up and went into the little bucket up on top. Now that bucket up on top has 2 compartments. Each compartment holds a half bushel. And there's a counterweight up there where you can set it for different grains. 32 pounds for a bushel of oats. You had no other way to do that, and you had a counter up there. Every time it dumped, it would record a half bushel, and it would go into the dump into the auger, and then the auger was swung out into in our day it was a wagon bed. It wasn't a semi or anything like that, and it was dumped into a wagon bed. So it came out of this long tube-like affair you see, and there's an auger in there that would auger the grain out into the wagon. But that's kind of a unique thing, the mechanism for counting the bushels of wheat and oats, and the way you could set it for the different weights of the grains. Back in those days, farmers used oat straw for cattle feed when we did have quite a few dairy cattle around here, and you could blow that oat straw up in a hayloft. And I want to tell you, if you were ever up in a hayloft in July, late July or early August, when they were blowing oat straw up there, and it happened to have some bull nettles in it, it was pitch black and you could hardly breathe. And all the old farmers that were up in there stacking it back always had the red bandana across their nose to keep from choking to death. And it was just absolutely dark in the hayloft. But the cattle would eat oat straw. Well, I've seen guys. I've been up in the hayloft where there's 2 guys mowing back straw. You couldn't see them. How you ever managed it, I don't know.